So here we are once again with Kai Hutchison coming in, global educator, lover of Scratch, great books he's put out, the Teacher's Guide to Scratch, which we'll be auctioning off at the end of this webinar. Um, and we are going to be focusing on secondary curriculum today. So that will be our focus. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. You can put them in the chat, or we'll have a little bit of time at the end.
So yeah, today we're looking at curricular connections with Scratch for secondary for Quebec. So over here that would be grades 7 to 12. So yeah, I always have to sort of switch my brain with Quebec's 6 and 6 method instead of what I'm used to over here with secondary. I was told I got to do a secondary course, and I was thinking like, oh, grade 9 to 12. That's some complicated stuff. It's sort of one of the challenges is, Scratch is definitely really fantastic for middle grades. Generally by, grade 10, you've got, specialized computer science classes where you can sort of dive into more text stuff. So glad I remembered in time the Quebec system. So could try and adapt things. Hopefully we're at the right level here for everybody. So number one, who the heck am I? My name is Kai Hutchence. I'm CEO of Massive Corporation Game Studio, which is a video game company, but I also do a heck of a lot of coding education work. I've basically taught right across Canada, approximately 20,000 students by this point. And so tons of experience over the past 10 years trying to get people coding, primarily with Scratch, also with microbits, Python, JavaScript, you name it, whatever needs to happen, I try and make it happen. And then just this year, I tried to compile all my knowledge into a set of books to help teachers understand coding even better. So the Teacher's Guide to Scratch is 700 pages approximately of advice for teachers, the most comprehensive guide to Scratch out there on the market. And most importantly to me is it's actually written for teachers. So many books are all written for like students, just immediate activities to do. This actually talks about teachers' concerns and perspectives. So hopefully that can be of great help to people. I've also done an online course, which is completely separate material, but again, great way to train and understand Scratch, particularly, again, from a teacher's perspective. So we deal with, classroom strategies and pedagogy and grading and all of those great things that you really kind of want to know and rarely get brought up. So hopefully those can be of help to people. So why do we need Scratch? Why do we want to work with it? Why do we bother putting on the time and effort to learn Scratch? Well, coding, of course, is getting mandated across school districts everywhere in the country and in the world. So you kind of have to do something about coding. And to me, Scratch is the most accessible system for coding, the most accessible platform for coding that I've really seen. And it's incredibly versatile. So you can really use it for so many things in so many ways. And that's why I'm using it for this cross-curricular look at coding, because it can handle anything. It is such a wonderful tool to work with. And it really has a huge amount of support. So there are umpteen million users. They've actually now crossed over the 1 billion projects made mark. So there are so many users on Scratch that they have made 1 billion projects now. So that and the backing it has from MIT and Harvard and their educational teams just mean it has this amazing support system, so you can know it's going to be there for you. It's not a private for-profit company. You don't have to worry about the company closing down or anything. This is the most reliable thing in computing out there, basically. And so that makes it a great thing to actually invest in. It's great for learning, and in this particular workshop, we're going to see that it's not just about code. It's a great way to explore ideas and subjects in all kinds of ways. And hopefully, we can see that we can really use it as a tool for learning. It's not just something you need to teach itself, but it's something that we can use as a tool to teach everything else that we need to. So the reason we want to go cross-curricular is, of course, we need to save time. We need to add coding to the curriculum. We aren't taking out science or math or health. So how the heck do we have enough hours in the day? Well, best approach we can do is use coding to actually do things that we need to do. And this is a big thing that I try and get across to people, is that we don't just code for coding's sake. That doesn't really have any meaning or purpose. We code because we want something done. We want to be able to express ourselves with an artistic project. We want to improve our productivity with productivity software. We want to communicate information, whatever it is. Coding is a tool. Computers are a tool for us, and coding is about how we use computers to make our lives better. Now, by working with Scratch, we can get students to do project-based learning and develop programs and see how to think about the design of things. And so we'll get into concepts like design thinking and engineering concepts, which can definitely tie in with high school, secondary requirements, particularly in the US. They've gone huge on engineering as a curricular need, and we may at any time have administrators decide that's the great idea for us. So good to be prepared for that. And so we can get students thinking more about their own projects and learning how to define their ideas and then execute their ideas. And so development based, project-based learning can be a really wonderful way that we can, center the students' desires and needs and interests. And that helps build a intrinsic motivation for them to learn. We also have the opportunity for play-based learning because Scratch is so good at making video games and interactive experiences that we can have our students interact with what they create in Scratch or what other people have created in Scratch, so that they can learn about subjects through an interactive play-based method. So there's a lot of great things we can do with Scratch, particularly towards cross-curricular learning. So there's a number of different ways that we can incorporate Scratch into a classroom, into different lesson plans, into different activities. Each one has its own sort of strengths and weaknesses, different ways that we can approach a classroom for different needs, different subjects. Obviously, direct instruction, just leading people step by step to build a project that you already know, is a really good way to start. Scratch is really wonderfully open and diverse and versatile, but the reality is kids are not going to understand all those crazy and amazing things that it can do until you guide them through some of those. And so direct instruction is still going to be your primary source and method for getting kids really working with it. Now, obviously, we want to get to the point where they're doing more exploratory, self-directed learning, but if we don't give them some really good direct instruction to establish some of the principles of coding and some of the major techniques and concepts behind coding, chances are they're not going to necessarily understand them or discover them themselves. So we do really need to use direct instruction to sort of push into new ideas and expose them to new concepts and techniques. But once we've established some level of comfort and familiarity with Scratch, we can look at things like doing challenges where we create a definition of something that we want them to do. This can be, an example of, a definition of a project that we want them to build, and can they achieve that? Or it can start even simpler, where we start with a project and then we challenge them to add a feature or change a feature in it, just so they're starting to play around with the idea of customizing something. They don't have to build it all from scratch. They can just sort of, hey, what if you go and poke this section? What if you try to change those graphics? What if you make it your own, add your own name to it? Stuff like that. So we can also look at using starter projects so that we've got some sort of base to begin with, and then we can tell them, hey, go look at this, add that to it, build from it. And that way we can sort of lower the complexity or the burden on the student to get to where we want them to be. And this is actually what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to give you a starter project that sort of has a bunch of the code done already, sort of the less interesting stuff already done. And then I'm going to walk you through with direct instruction how to do some of the more complicated things that really bring it to life. So that can be, again, a really good way to sort of cut some of the boring stuff or stuff you've already covered out from a lesson, so that you've got, you can get through it a little quicker. Importantly, you can also use Scratch just to demonstrate and play with concepts. You don't have to build with it. There's lots already built, and your students can simply explore it with things that are already done. And that can really be a great way to introduce concepts or reinforce them, or encourage students to keep working on something because it's actually fun and it's turned into a game. So we'll see an example of a great way to just practice math skills as a computer game. When we have Scratch projects, we can always have students simply review them and analyze them to see that they understand how code works and that they've got essentially like a level of literacy to look at code and process, what is that going to do? Why does it act the way it does? It's a really key skill for them to develop, not just building something, hitting play, dropping blocks and seeing if they get the right result, but being able to reinforce that, the code does have a specific meaning. There is a key logic. It is predictable. And it's really important skill if they're going to be able to fix bugs in their own projects. They really need to be able to read through the code and go, this is what it's doing, and I understand that, and that's why that happens. And then they can find out, walking through it, oh, that's why it's all blowing up. As well, when they do that, when they get used to being able to read code, we can get to the last concept, is being able to modify and remix projects. They're going to be able to take other people's code, read through it, try and understand what it does, and be able to predict how they would change it or add to it, and then make it their own. So there's lots of different ways that we can be incorporating Scratch into our classrooms, taking different approaches to it. And I think it's really important that we do explore those different concepts, that we show the diversity of how we interact with code. And each of those different ways to use Scratch really does bring a different focus and a different mentality and a different set of skills to the front when we do them. So great to give that diversity and make sure you're hitting all of those competencies. So now the most fun part of the workshop here, we're going to take a look at some projects that are already made to see how Scratch can bring to life different subject matters. And so we can take a look. We've got a list of 6 different subjects here, and each of these is a already made project out there by the community that highlights some way that we can interact with a subject. So this first one is a game that allows you to practice your math skills. And this is a different one than I showed in last week's workshop. So this is a little higher level. If you start it up, you're going to see it's actually a really smooth game. They did a lot of great things with this. I'm just going to mute this. But when you play, there are 3 different types of learning or math you can work with. So there are operations, there's geometry, and there's systems. And so operations are going to throw you different math problems, generally, multiplication, division type stuff. And then you've got 4 answers to choose from. And so it's going to be just randomly throwing at you a number of questions, and you'll select an answer. You're right or you're wrong. I think it does 10 questions in a row. Maybe it's only 5. Or no, I think it's only 5. Yeah. So we can see how well I do here. Oh, got one wrong. And so you can see this is, 4 or 5 digit operations. Well, potentially only some simpler ones, but pretty good practice on math. It'll vary every time you play. You'll get totally different questions. And so you can see how you do a set of 5 questions. There's as well geometry questions, which may take a little bit for you to wrap your head around. It's more of a challenge than you might think. If something has a perimeter of 24 and its area is 27, okay, so 9 by 3, I think would do that. And so, yeah, it takes a bit more chewing on than you might think for a simple little question. But I'll jump out from this and do the last one. Is really quite painful. So here we get algebraic questions for graphing, and so we can apparently get to quite complicated questions. I'm not even going to try talking while doing this math in my head, but you will be surprised how complicated some of those questions can get. And so, yes, we can definitely go right through secondary with some of these questions. So a fun little example of a math game that definitely gets up to higher level challenges. If we want to take a look at science, I've got an example of an interactive diagram here, or diorama. And so in this case, it's a example of the water cycle.
The water cycle. Learn about the parts of the water cycle by clicking on each word in this interactive diagram.
And so you can see that it's got actually a more complicated version of the water cycle than we tend to teach in younger grades. This is a little more like a Geography 101 class here with worrying about groundwater and infiltration and such. But it's nice.
Precipitation is any
You've
form of
got,
water, such as rain, snow, sleet, or hail that falls to the
different, I'll just mute that. We've got all the different categories of positions in the water cycle. You can click on the different ones. They tell you a bit more about it. Depending on the project, I've also seen ones where it'll be a still image and then it'll only animate what you click. And so it can be more artistic, more interactive, all depends, but it gives you an idea of how you can bring science concepts, cycles, processes to life in Scratch. You know, it's got all the artistic qualities there, animation potentials. You can have pop-up information and drill down into new concepts and more information. So one of the things I kind of like to point out is you can do a poster of the water cycle. You can do a diorama of the water cycle. You can do a Scratch project of the water cycle. They're all equivalent, right? They'll exercise the same reflection of knowledge. Why we want to do it with Scratch is that it's simply a way for us to tap into coding. We need to teach coding. We need them to give an example that they understand the water cycle, smush them together. This is what you get. It doesn't have to be that they're doing something that can't be done in any other way. It isn't that Scratch has to be some radical new approach to a subject or piece of learning. It's just that we're using what we need to learn and teach while incorporating coding. And a big part of learning coding is simply repetition. They have to get used to it. They have to get used to using it. And so we just can slip it in while we're doing other normal stuff. And it doesn't have to be that different than what we've already done in other formats of classroom activity. It's just, again, a way we can tap coding while doing everything else that we need to do. So that's an example of science. If we want to look at social studies, I've got a project here that compares cultures. And so we can look at two different cultures here. In this case, they're ancient cultures, the culture of the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians. And here, again, we have students basically doing, what you could do with a poster project or a report, but here it's interactive and you can drill down and take a look at maps. And so we see, oh, okay, we can drill down. We place Sumer into its geographical context, which is kind of cool. We can take a look at its religion. There's an awful lot of text on here. If you zoom in, do it full screen, you can actually read the text. It's a little challenging in the small screen version. But you can, again, compare cultures. So tell us about the religion of ancient Sumer. Do you want to go back to Sumer, or do you want to see the Egyptian version of it, which is cool? So, you can look at the Egyptian culture as well, talk about its geography, talk about its history, talk about its religion, talk about food, whatever you want, right? It's just a way that we can take social studies, turn it into a coding project, and then we're learning social studies while we practice our coding. Now, there are some unique opportunities here with, the map was kind of cool that, you could see how they're contextualized, and you can drill down and see a more in-depth map of that region. So there are different things you can explore. You could add a lot more multimedia if you wanted to, whatever you like. It's just a way we can use coding to explore those topics. Last week for language arts, I gave an example of animated poetry. In this case, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to show you a way more complicated version. So this is actually, verging on film level animation. They put an incredible amount of effort into this. So I really love this project. And so you can see a nice little animation here. And yeah, use this, sorry. So you can see they've got a character narrating the poetry, which was one of the methods I mentioned in the previous last week's workshop. But here you can see as they go through the poem, they're actually having animations, full screen animations here that actually match the poem, which is crazy ambitious. Love that they did this. So, and it's a poem created by the student. Actually, I think this project, the student created the poem themselves, all of the animations and the music, all within Scratch. So the bar kind of high. I wouldn't necessarily expect that from students, but it shows you what's possible, So if you're a music teacher, by the way, Scratch can also cover music. I didn't get into it in the presentation, but it's all there. Animation, incorporate your poems, bring them to life, all sorts of crazy potentials here. So really a lot that can be explored on that front, bringing writing to life. And again, you can also look at, narrative games, as well as, movies. And so narration and creative writing have huge potential to be brought to life through Scratch. If we look at graphical arts, the art style exploration example here gives a look at Sol LeWitt's art, who was a formative artist in the field of generative art or algorithmic art. And so this project uses Scratch to create a random composition using Sol LeWitt's wall drawing 86 as a inspiration for what it's doing. Now, if you're unfamiliar with wall drawing 86, thankfully, they actually provide a link in the notes and credits so you can see the original art piece. And it does a pretty good job. So it's a more colorful take than the original. But it's a neat way that we can look at particular artists. You can talk about pointillism and use the pen tool to do pointillist art, or you can do, algorithmic lines like Sol LeWitt. You could do crazy paint splashes like Pollock, Jackson Pollock. All kinds of art can be brought to life. It's a graphical program, and it allows even animation. So you can not only do a finished art piece, you can actually see it being brought to life through animation. So really cool way that we can look at all the different ways humans have created art and thought about art in interesting ways. And lastly, touch on health. Here, we've got an example of a recipe brought to life through animation and interaction. And so this is about making bánh chưng, which is a Vietnamese steamed dumpling. And there are tons of really great projects like this where kids are exploring and bringing to life their culture and sharing it through a Scratch project. So this is a recipe in action through Scratch. And so you can learn what bánh chưng is and how to make it. And so it's a really great way to explore a recipe and a culture. So there's a little example start here of looking at the different ingredients and what order you have to use them in and the processes and all that. So it's a really cool way that you can bring a culture to life. And so it's a little social studies, it's a little health, but ways we can think about food and what we eat and traditional values about food. It's a really nice way to sort of explore those cultures. So that's a look at some of the things people have created and give you some ideas about what you could do in your own classroom. Now, for today, we're going to take a look more towards geometry and trigonometry in a math project. So here I've got a code along starter project. So if you click on the link, it'll take you to a project here. I'll grab the link here for everybody. So if you go to that project, that is a starter project for our wave generator. And you can join me on that page. And when you get there, you can click either the See Inside button or the Remix button. And we'll take a look at this project. Now, it's a starter project, which generally means it doesn't have everything, so it won't do much right now. If you hit the green flag, not going to get a heck of a lot, but we'll fix it up in short order here. So I'll jump inside here. And you can see that there's a fair bit of code here already. So this is a couple little commands here. Basically, a wave, of course, has a amplitude and a frequency. And so I've just got 4 little code stacks there so you can increase or decrease the amplitude or frequency as needed. And there's a message 1 event that basically updates what kind of wave it's drawing. So if you change the amplitude, it needs to sort of recalibrate. Now, what we need to do here is we need to create the initial, the real working part, functioning main loop of our wave drawing system here. And so in this orbit sprite, we're going to tell it to basically orbit and create a circle. And that circle is, of course, going to have a size based on the amplitude of the wave, and it's going to draw as fast as the frequency tells us to draw it. So here in the when green flag clicked stack, we've already got it starting by setting the amplitude to 50 and frequency to 50. So those are just default values, so it gives you sort of a middle range of things. And what we're going to need to do is we need to tell the orbiting dot, you'll see there's sort of a red center dot, that it's going to orbit around. And so we need to tell it this orbit, where to start and how to start. And to do that, we're going to start by telling it to go to, and not a random position, but we're going to tell it to go to the center. So we're going to have it, of course, position relative to the center so that it orbits the center. And to do that, we'll tell it to go to center first. And we're going to need to make sure we point in direction 90. The number doesn't really matter. It's just we need to make sure that it starts from a consistent position and direction. So that basically gets us our start. Now, what we want to do is we need it to have an amplitude, which is the distance from the center that it's going to draw that orbit at. If it's a giant amplitude, it's going to be way out from the center and draw a huge wave. If it's a tiny amplitude, it's just going to be a tiny little circle. To do that, we're going to tell it to move not 10 steps, but if we go to variables, we'll tell it to move amplitude steps. And that's going to make sure that it positions itself the appropriate distance out from the center to give us the right amplitude. Now, once it gets out from the orbit, from the center to its correct orbit by amplitude, we need to tell it to turn 90 degrees so that instead of going further away from the center, it's going to start moving around the center. So we're going to go back to motion and we're going to tell it to turn right 90 degrees. That way it goes out and it turns and it will be able to move around in an orbit. So that gets us to the right starting position. Now, how does it orbit? Well, it needs to move and it needs to continue moving forever, right? So we're going to go down to control and we're going to grab it a forever code block so that we can make sure it's going to move in orbit all the time. Now, to get it to move in an orbit, we need it to both move forward and turn constantly. So in motion, we're going to grab a move 10 steps and we're going to give it a turn right code block as well. Now, both of those are, of course, going to be determined by the rate of amplitude and frequency. Now, you can see the message 1 stack actually has a couple code blocks here that set a turn speed and set a move speed. And so we've got 2 variables already calculated to do what we need. We just need to go to variables and we're going to grab our move speed, strangely enough, for our move code block. And we're going to grab our turn speed, strangely enough, for our turn block. And so that will get us a orbiting dot. So that gets us orbiting movement. And now you can also change your amplitude and frequency with the arrow keys because we've already coded that. And once you do, you should have a nice little orbiting purple dot around your red center dot. So I'm going to stop that for now so I don't go dizzy. Now, that's great. We've got a nice little orbit there. So, you know, if we wanted to make a planetary system, for example, we've already got the system in place necessary. We just have to think of planets as having a different amplitude and frequency. And you could set different planets out away from the center sun. But what we really want to do is we want to bring this to life and realize that an orbit and a wave are related. And to do that, we're going to make it visible. And to do that, we're going to go over to our draw object. And you're going to see that there's a draw wave event and an end event here already in our object. And we're just going to figure out how do we get it to actually draw a wave now that we've got that orbit motion. Well, hopefully you've used the pen feature before. If you haven't, it's a little extension into Scratch. It adds in some new functionality that they don't add in by default. But what we need to do is we just need to tell Scratch that we want the pen tool in this project. So we're going to go down to the bottom left here and find the little purple square with 2 little code blocks and a plus icon. And we're going to click on that. And it allows us to add the pen tool. And when we add that, you're going to see that you get a whole bunch of new code blocks to work with that will allow you to draw within your project. And so this allows us to create drawings on our screen, and we're going to create drawings that tie in with our little orbiting dot. So when I receive draw wave event needs to start with a pen down code block. Now, as a refresher, the pen tool works a lot like a real pen. If you have the pen down on the paper, you're going to be able to draw. If you lift the pen up and you move it around, it's no longer drawing. So pen down tells the computer to actually draw. Pen up tells the computer you want to move the pen without drawing. Otherwise, you're just going to constantly scribble wherever it moves. So we start with a pen down to tell it, okay, now we're going to start drawing. Now, to draw our wave, we're going to end up drawing right across left to right on our scratch stage. And that means that we're going to go from left to right on the screen. And we're going to need to continually draw as we go along until we hit the edge of the screen, because that's going to stop us and we're not going to be able to draw off the screen, because what point would there be? Because you'd never see it. So what we need to do is go over to control, and we're going to use a code block that doesn't get used a heck of a lot. We're going to grab a repeat until code block. And this is a really cool, powerful code block that allows you to do something until a condition is met. And so you can create a condition that then stops that code from running. So it's like a forever, it's going to keep doing it until this condition is met. And what we're going to do for a condition is we're going to go grab the operators blocks, and we're going to grab a greater than code block with spiky sides so it fits into our repeat until. Now, what we want to do is we'll go up to motion, and in the bottom of the motion code blocks, you're going to see there's an X position, a Y position, and direction. And basically what we want to do is we want to measure where we are from left to right on our stage. And that is our X position. So if our X position is greater than 239, we've basically hit the right edge of our screen. And that tells us, well, keep drawing until you hit the right edge of the screen, and then something's got to change. So what we're going to repeat until that point is we're going to scroll up here, and we're going to move one step so that we're going to draw all the way across the screen, but slowly. And we need to set our Y position to the correct amount so that we're hitting the right arc on our wave. So how do we do that? Well, it's a little more complicated. We're going to set our Y position. So if you scroll down the blue blocks to find set Y to a specific number, we're not going to type this number in because it would always be the same. We need a dynamic value here. Now, what would that be? Well, if we use our sensing blocks, we can look at the value of another sprite. And this is a crazy powerful code block, and it does not get understood very obviously. But where is it here? Okay, down a little. They don't make it obvious. So you're going to grab the backdrop number of stage, which does not sound right at all. But if we grab that code block and we set it into our set Y, which is a little invisible, light blue on medium blue. Okay, we've got backdrop number of stage. Well, it doesn't have to be the backdrop number, and it doesn't have to be the stage. So if we select stage, we can switch this over to a different sprite. And we can select the orbit. And then if we set the Y position of the orbit, that will be where it is vertically. So if we run that, we're going to see that it doesn't run just yet because, right, I forgot we have to actually call it in a different script, but we're almost there. So while we're here, we'll just finish off 2 more code blocks on this stack. What we want to do is, after we've drawn the whole way across our screen, which is that repeat until, we're going to grab a pen up and we're going to run another event here, because essentially you've hit the end of your drawing. And so we're going to broadcast end, which we're going to use to tell the computer to go back to the start to draw the wave again. So that's all we need for draw wave. Now we need to finish up our when I receive end script, and it's only going to be 3 code blocks, so this won't be too painful. But what we need it to do is, if you've drawn all the way across the screen, we're going to keep drawing our wave by going back to the start. So we need to tell it to go back to the very left-hand side of the screen, and that's going to be go to X, Y, except here we're going to choose minus 240, which is the left-hand edge of the screen. And we're going to go Y0, which is nice and in the middle. Now, if we've gone back to the left-hand side, we've already got the wave drawn across the screen from the last time it drew, right? And so we just keep scribbling wave over wave over wave over wave. It would eventually just be this solid blue bar, unless, you know, you manage to hit perfect synchronicity that it, you know, draws on top of itself every time. Good luck ever doing that. But what we can do to make it a little more visible is, back in the pen code blocks, there's an erase all code block, and that's going to clear all of our previous drawings and get us back to a nice clean white page. So that'll give us a clean slate to continue our drawing. And after that, the one thing we need to do is we need to tell it to actually start drawing. And this is why it wasn't drawing a wave just yet. So we're going to take broadcast, draw a wave, drop it in there, and now you're going to see, with a when green flag clicked has broadcast end. When end is called, it's going to erase and go back to the start. It's going to draw a wave, and then it's going to go through the drawing cycle. So now, hopefully, if we click the green flag, well, I'll be darned, there's a wave. And now, if we change our frequency, we can make very fast or very slow waves. And eventually it will hit the end and start drawing from the left-hand side again. And if you want, you can increase the amplitude and we get bigger waves, or you can decrease the amplitude and get tiny little waves. So now we can draw all kinds of different waves and see how amplitude and frequency change what we're doing. And we can see the fundamental laws of trigonometry in action as a orbit is transformed into a wave pattern. So 224, that's about as good as I can hit. There we go, 225. You wanted me to wrap up by 225, and we've solved trigonometry and orbiting bodies and taught people how to use the pen tool and whatever else. So
That's really cool.
how did I figure it out? Pain and suffering.
That's really cool, Kai. And I mean, I imagine too, like, I loved your idea too, that they don't have to code all the time. It can be something where they're just playing around with concepts, but they can see the visual of it, right? So
Yeah.
I love that idea that it can also just be used as a textbook, or like something where they would look at it and play around and see the differences. So,
And that's the beauty of it. We can think of Scratch as a textbook that's alive.
mhm,
It's there, it's animating. It isn't just a static screenshot of a concept. No, we're talking about orbits, and there it is orbiting.
right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
And then you can muck around with it too. And then like, okay, I'm gonna throw a moon around this one as it orbit. Like you could recreate like
crazy stuff.
crazy.
And that's the beauty of it. And the real wonderful thing is when you start playing with these tools, and Scratch has that remix function, which I know rubs teachers the wrong way.
Mm,
But the truth is, it is how we learn coding, that we need to be inspired and see, what crazy thing are you doing? How are you doing that?
right.
Uh, you know, I would not expect any kid to be able to sit down and just inquiry their way into understanding how to do what we just did. That would be a real miracle to have happen. But when we can expose them to the idea and then tell them this exists and here it is, what do you want to do with that?
Yeah.
Who knows what they're going to do?
Yeah, for
And,
sure.
you will have kids that try and make something orbit something that's orbiting and do crazy stuff. And who knows what they'll make? Or
Yeah, exactly.
maybe some students will be more musically inclined and they'll say, oh, waves and amplitude, that's music. How does that sound? And you could actually use the sound tools in Scratch to actually show how it sounds.
Right. That's way cool. Way cool. I like the idea too of that, like the visual of, like particularly in math, like it's so sometimes the formulas are like I don't understand what I'm looking at. But
Yeah.
where you can plug it in and see in the code and then transfer it over to the visual, it makes that, for somebody that's a visual learner like myself, like I need to see stuff.
Yeah.
I can see how this could be really helpful for kids.
And that's the beauty of it, is it's such a visual way to learn, but it's also a tactile way to learn,
Right.
which is, one of the crazy things I always tell people is like Scratch is tactile. They're like, it's digital. It can't be tactile. But when you start using Scratch, it's like, no, it really is. It really
Hmm.
is. The way you snap things together and the way you can see them interact with each other and move, there is this tactile sense to it. And so, yeah, visual learners, tactile learners, uh, you know, everybody has a way of engaging with Scratch because it is multimedia. And so, it offers us some really amazing opportunities to engage with our learners and help them engage too.
Absolutely. That's way cool.
So there is a finished project link in the slides there if you need it. Hopefully you save your copy that you've made as well. But if you do need it, it is there. And so, yeah, thanks for having me in. Thanks for joining us. I've given you links there to, again, more info about the books and the online course. If you are looking for professional development, uh, the online course really is an awesome option there. As well, it was just election day here in Saskatchewan yesterday. So, and it's soon to be election day in Nova Scotia. I also do have a video game that I made, not within Scratch, but professional video game that I have on my website that teaches students about the jurisdictions, the levels of government and division of power in Canada that I just put out. So if you're dealing with social studies, um, there is other games as well, considerably less educational, but jurisdictions game I'm trying to push out there to people, make sure students can also learn about um, Canadian government in a slightly more engaging way than
Hmm.
just memorizing a sheet of paper that says provinces are responsible for these powers and federal is responsible for those. So again,
Well, Kyle, definitely share it with our social studies people. They're always looking for ways to engage the learners, and bam,
yeah,
right there.
exactly. Interactive digital tools. It's all quite new for schools, but there's some really cool, amazing things we can do.
Right on.
So yeah, hopefully
Cool.
Scratch will be a big part of your learning systems and classroom, and it's just a ton of fun to work with.
Well, this has been great, Kai. Thanks so much for again coming and sharing these ideas. And again, it's like I'm grabbing one or two little ideas and then I'm thinking about a project, which I'm sure just starts to snowball like that. But last week too is just great too with um the poetry and the scrolling and the making the sprites that are invisible and like all that was like big moments of wow, okay, starting to get it. So
Yeah, and
um
that's a great thing is the more projects you do, you'll learn more little techniques, and then you'll start seeing how those techniques can come together, and then the world is your oyster. You know, you can go anywhere you need to. You can do anything you need to. Once you've known enough little techniques, you start exploring and putting them together in your own way. And that's what we do with our students as well, you know.
mhm.
That's why I say, you know, you need the direct instruction. Here's a little technique. Now that you know that, what crazy things do you do with it? You know,
Right.
they can run off and do their own stuff and explore on their own once we give them those tools to work with.
Amazing. Amazing. This was a lot of fun. So thanks again, Kai. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
And thank you guys for coming. I hope you guys got some good stuff out of it as well. There's lots to think about, and we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. So
Yep.
thanks.